Hello.
Hello. So tonight we're going to talk about worship. What is worship, I think is the question. Is that the question, Dave?
The question is how important, sorry, no it's not how important, it's how is worship an important part of the Christian life?
Oh, how is it an important part? That changes my answer, but whatever. How is worship an important part? So maybe the best place to start is to define it. I always think like when you use a word, define the word.
Yeah.
So my searching the biblical Bible dictionaries, the word that I found was a word for to lie prostrate before or to bring your forehead to the ground. So that's obviously like a physical look of what worship looks like biblically. I do also think it is metaphorical in a sense as well, but maybe you guys have something to say about that, to expound on that. So does anybody else want to expound on what I said?
When I was looking sort of definitions of worship, I just looked at like a general definition. So obviously it could be any deity that they're talking about, but we're talking about God, obviously. But it's a verb. It's the idea of showing reverence and adoration for a deity. So, showing, doing, living out our adoration and our praise towards God.
So we've got definitions. Now the question is...
Yeah. Well, I think also, I was thinking of just, to me, it's worshiping is turning to God. And I kind of want to just kind of smooth into more of a kind of like an attitude, of what worship is all about. Last time we met, we talked about what makes Christianity unique. And I think we left with talking about a lot about relationship. Okay, so if we left talking about relationship, it seems natural to go into worship because again, you guys are talking about your relationship between deities, like how do we express ourselves or how do we call out, and so how do we respond, what's our response to the action of a God, and so for Christians, worship is that reaction to a very specific interaction with God. So it might be the realization that you're a sinner, and that's a horrible thing, but you're also forgiven from all your sins by a loving God.
Okay, awesome.
And that thought should manifest a response, reaction, and that should be like, wow, thank you so much, God. And that is kind of that's a really basic form of worship.
I actually like that because that paints a picture of like there's that act of being appreciative, that act of being grateful and thankful. That's the attitude behind. But it's not always just praise and thanks. It could sometimes be just acknowledging the fact that God is God in His mightiness, because I think David does that a lot in the Psalms. David gets caught up in the fact that God is mighty and powerful and worthy.
Yeah.
And he sort of gives praise, which is a form of worship, of how amazing God is, but it is reciprocal relationship stuff for sure.
Okay, so worship's reflecting on who God is and our relationship with Him, but it's also thinking about who God is. So a lot of times we think about worshiping in terms of like maybe using lyrics of a song. You might think the lyrics of a song can help because the lyrics might give us something to think about in terms of our relationship with God. So again, for me, I'm thinking about worship is certainly that important aspect of Christianity that is our relationship with this God who exists and who is there and who has built a life for us, and He's given us His Son to die on the cross, and He's given us so much. He's so interactive. So we talked again last time of interacting with God, and so all this is a part of like if God's done so much in our lives, it's almost like worship is just kind of again, it's a kind of us kind of going back towards Him. It's like again, because I think last time we also talked about like how Christianity is different because we don't have to work for our relationship with God. And so I think, but as people, we want to do something. We want to move towards God.
Well, David wanted to build a temple.
That's right. And so how other religions might do it, and even some types of Christians might do it, is by works. I want to please God so that I can be right with God. But Christians don't do that. Instead, we recognize that we're right by God because we're forgiven, and He's done so many wonderful things that's come from Him. And so our response, because we want to respond. Humans want to respond. Now what do I do for you, God? And I think worship is part of what we do as response.
Yeah, I like that, Scott. It's a response. Like, I'm even just thinking about it, the creatures and the beasts that are around the throne in Revelation, and they're all just singing out like, "Worthy, worthy, worthy is the Lamb."
Yeah.
Praise Him, for
That's
He is
right.
holy. It's just as a response to
Who he is.
and His goodness and His kindness and His grace and His mercy and all these properties, characteristics of God that we know about Him. It's just as a response to that.
I was actually thinking about Revelation when I was thinking about this question, and I think back to Sunday school in terms of the youth. We always start off with like the Lord's Prayer. Like, once you there that, and the first couple of lines of that is, "Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." And looking through Revelation and what it's like in heaven, they're all just constantly giving back to God through worship, through physical acts, through prayer, because it says the sweet smell of aroma is through prayer. And through that, Jesus is teaching the disciples through the Lord's Prayer, this is one way of worshipping, is giving everything back to Him by talking to Him. And I think again when He says, give your heart, your mind and your soul to God, that encompasses all of you. So it doesn't need to be like a physical like worship in a song. It's all of you starting off your day, putting your mind on God, turning to God, praising God in any way that you can, as long as you're giving it all to God.
Do you think we run into a problem though when things become prescribed?
Yes.
Like when we start saying, this is what worship looks like and this is how you need to do it, and then we start creating all these prescribed notions of what it is, when reality is like, we do currently what we do in churches because traditionally that's what we've done in churches, but I mean, like, it goes out with church walls, you know, of how you worship, and it goes out with your daily devotional time, you know, these prescriptive things that we put on ourselves. But say the question again, Dave?
Absolutely.
How is worship an important part of Christian life?
Right, so how is it an important part of Christian life?
I would say, if we go back to the Lord's Prayer and He says we're getting a taste of heaven, this is what it's like in God's will in heaven. If we think about that, we are doing certain aspects that we would do in heaven, and when I look at that and study that and see it, when we don't get to do those different types of things, our souls don't feel fed. And when our souls don't feel fed, it gives us a weird feeling or puts us into a negative place, because we're like, well why are you stopped? Why is this stopped? Why is there a barrier here and we've got this backload of worship to give God? And I felt that especially during COVID, where they've said that you can't do singing. And I felt that where you can't do worship in that sense, and churches are like, well, how does that work? Because like we said, the traditions of it is we worship God through music, because it gets us to meditate on the lyrics, it gets us to think about His word, it gets us to put our mindset in Him in a very melodic
it's a lovely environment
and lovely way.
So
And once that's stopped,
awesome.
not by your choice, once it's taken away from you, our souls ache and we end up feeling down and depressed.
Okay, so that's good, because again, we're living in a world that's fallen and broken, and certainly we've mentioned before the problems that we have with mental health in the 21st century Western world, and other kind of physical, just health issues that people suffer just now. It could be stress and anxiety of really crazy. Sorry.
guys.
Okay, we'll keep going. Let's just to give your phone off.
Well, I have to go answer this because it's the...
Okay, well, just give it a second because we waited. Okay, so it was like I was saying, health. Yeah, our health, our mental health. You know.
Yeah.
And the thing is, now again, I think Christianity can help us in very, very different ways, and spiritually. Of course, we think, okay, well, being a Christian means you worship, and it's a spiritual good thing, a spiritual healthy thing. But it also it's the whole being, it's a whole person. Yeah. So I think having an attitude to worship is good for your mental health. And if you're struggling with your mental health, I think worship can help. But you also have to count the cost. I think that's what I'm trying to get at, is you have to count the cost. That is what is now important for you. If it's important for you to just have good mental health, then you may not get that through worship. If your point if you're trying to really get maybe a really if you want to live a life that's full of pleasure and happy feelings and happy thoughts, then again worship might not get you there. If you have a materialistic kind of worldview where you want to make lots of money and have lots of toys and stuff like that. Then again, maybe worship's not going to get you there. Even if you're a person who loves other people and you want society to thrive, so you have some kind of utilitarian kind of worldview, worship still might not get you what you need. Your ultimate goal has to be, I want God.
Yeah.
Okay? So above anything else, healthy society, healthy mind, healthy body, healthy, relationships, good times. If your ultimate goal is, I want God, I want to know God, I want to be with God, then that, I think, is where worship can come in. Because worship can put you there first.
Yeah.
And all these other things, as the Bible hints at, can be added unto you, in terms of like, just kind of, because you get the main thing solved. The main thing, I turn to God daily, and I've got peace. Because I turn to God. Not because I want to have peace and I want to find peace, and so I worship to have peace. But no, I want God. And when I have God, everything else is kind of okay. Everything else kind of makes sense.
When you're describing that, I just picture Peter walking on the storm to Jesus. And when he takes his mind off Jesus and his focus off Jesus, everything else is stormy and crazy for him. But the whole point is to keep our eyes on God, and that's part of what worship does. It directs you back onto Him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that puts me in mind of what Jesus says in Luke 4:8 when he's tempted by Satan. He says, "You must worship the Lord your God and serve only Him." And so I think there's even an indication there that like being in a worshipful place and a state of worship actually helps us in temptation as well. And Jesus is also kind of alluding to the fact that it's like worship is a mindset, it's a lifestyle, it's like this ongoing kind of thing that where we're worshiping God and putting Him first.
Yeah, I think maybe we can briefly hint on different modes or methods of worship, because we already talked a little bit about singing, but is there other kind of modes of worship, or are we stuck with just singing?
I think any form of expressive arts is a good way
Yeah.
to do it. I think of for youth, we've used videos to get them to think about God. We've used drama skits to get them to think about God. Different creative outlets for them to express their devotion to God. And I think that's what worship is, an expressive way for you to show your devotion.
Yeah, very good.
I think music can often be very helpful because it does kind of calm us.
Yeah.
It calms our hearts and minds and sort of helps us to sort of focus in, especially like you were saying about if the lyrics are, really expressing how awesome God is, then that can kind of help us to kind of get in that place. But I do think it has to go beyond music because as we're saying, it really seems like the Bible's telling us that worship is a lifestyle and a mindset. So in that sense, I think all the disciplines should be able to help us to kind of be in a place of worship.
And the cool thing is, I think worship, as I wasn't sure if I wanted to classify worship as this, but I'm sure it is. But it feels to me like it's almost like it kind of it's more than. It's almost like worship kind of pulls things together because you can bring prayer into it and celebration into it, Thanksgiving into it, and all these other really wonderful attributes of Christian discipline, simplicity, all kinds of stuff can go into it. Yeah. So it's like a funnel that brings all these disciplines together, and it's like a nice conduit or a canvas of the mind to be able to call out, to see, to heal, to rejuvenate, to see, and not for its own sake, but because God's there, and we've turned to Him, and we've acknowledged Him, and we're talking about Him. And even right now, isn't this not just kind of a form of worship? Yeah. Just sitting around having a conversation with other believers. That's worship.
What does Malachi say? He's like, Malachi 3:16, I think it is, every single time you guys talk about me, I'm writing it down.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I love that verse.
Yeah. Just extolling the goodness and awesomeness.
Yeah.
So I guess just kind of wrap this thing up, guys. And then Satan, it appears to me, wants us to stop worshiping God and worship other things. And we know that there's definitely this direction of other idols and other gods that exist. I mentioned materialism, pleasure, apathy, anxiety. There's other things that want to stop us from worshiping God, and I think they will win out if we don't make a stand for ourselves and say, no, I will worship God and I will worship Him alone. I will not lay this down for comforts or for pleasure or for fun things. I will make it a point to be a person that worships God and will dedicate time to do that, because again, Satan wants us to stop worshiping, and I think even like mentioning the COVID situation, I think it's a lot of people I think have forsaken worship because it's horribly inconvenient to worship God when you can't get together with brothers and sisters in corporate singing, But does that mean we stop worshiping? Absolutely not. You got to keep worshiping. You got to keep worshiping, even if you can't get together with your brothers and sisters. Now, what this says is how valuable it is when we get together for corporate worship, doesn't it? That's the other side of the coin. Yeah. Is like, wow, we really need to get back to corporate worship because it's so important, and that's why traditionally we do these things because it's so important, it's so valuable. So that's the trick right now, guys. And I think in this time that we're living in right now, is like we need to keep worshiping because it's so important. It's fundamental. It's basic. It's good for the Christian soul, mind, spirit, everything. But it's something that we need to commit ourselves to, especially in difficult times like we're living in now, when it's not when we're not privy to being able to be together corporately and just show up and have a nice environment prepared for us to worship. Yeah. So is there anything else, guys, or is that pretty much us?
That's
fantastic. That's a wrap. Okay, guys, see you next time on Cornerstone Q&A.